All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about a tweet or a quote from Thomas Sowell. Now, it's very, very important in times like this. I mean, it was important even before, but especially in times like this. And he says, experts are often called in not to provide factual information or dispassionate analysis for the purpose of decision making by responsible officials, but to give political cover for decisions already made and based on other considerations entirely. Now, there's many different aspects of this to unpack. The first one being is the whole virus situation being, it's been obvious for like 2 months now that the death rate is incredibly much lower than we officially thought. The models overestimated the amount of infection and the amount of deaths by literally 10, 20 times, depending on the countries. Um, the guy who literally came up with the model for the UK was found to be pretty much a complete fraud who didn't even believe in his own theory. And this is the problem, that these people are either incredibly incompetent, in which case, why in the world is the government working for them? I mean, they're probably making mid at least six-figure salaries, maybe some of them probably even seven. Um, why like how can they possibly be so incompetent? No, I don't believe that's the case. And again, Thomas Sowell points it out, in that the people are they're people that have the accreditation. They got the PhD, they got the MD, they got whatever abbreviation the government needs to make it look like they're making decisions based off reason and evidence. But it doesn't. Like, I mean, you see with climate change, you see with the virus situation, you see with the gun control in Canada. I mean, it's almost every single policy the government implements, the opposite is usually what's true. I mean, you look at the virus, like I say, the experts, it's got a 5% death rate. It turns out it's like zero point 0.1, zero point 0.2. There's going to be 2 million people die in the States. There's 100,000 ish, give or, I mean, there's probably a little less because the numbers are inflated. Um, all this kind of these doomsday predictions. And the problem is that the government, again, because there is one option that these people are just that incompetent, but I don't believe that you can be a professional and have those credentials and be that wrong. Because I mean, the average person could have just threw out a wild guess and probably have been more accurate than them. So the evidence, I mean, it's one or two. Either they're incompetent or they're just corrupted, and corrupted may not be the best word, but they'll do whatever the government tells them, basically, because they're earning their cushy six-figure salaries, and all they have to do is just make it look like what the government's saying is true. It's the same thing with climate change, that all these climate scientists have to do to make their cushy six-figure salaries is just keep repeating and regurgitating the same info over and over again. Because if climate scientists started questioning the narrative and they came up with evidence that may prove the narrative wrong, well, the government would have no reason to fund climate change research anymore. Because if climate change is 100%, and I don't know if it's necessarily 100%, I think it's probably 80, 90% BS. But if it's definitively proven to not be an issue, well, then the government, there's no reason to spend massive amounts of money funding research, which means a lot of scientists are going to be out very cushy salaries. So that's the problem too, that people point out, oh, well, you can't trust a study that shows that climate change isn't an issue because they're paid off by big oil, even though they've never provided one example of that. Never, not once. I mean, it probably has existed, but they never provide any evidence of it. But yet, pretty much every climate scientist, is their job depends on the idea of climate change being a big issue. Because if climate change is largely a non-issue, well, then the government would be absolutely insane to spend a bunch of money researching it. Because why would you spend a bunch of money researching something that is a non-issue? Right? Like, it's just basic common sense. So, and it's the other thing with the virus, that the government is clearly wrong. They prop these people up there that have MD behind their name. Theresa Tam or any. I mean, Haydu doesn't have any formal background in the medical field, I don't believe. You have Fauci in the States, who's, I mean, not, I believe, is pretty much as bad as Tam. And they'll just say whatever. I mean, they'll literally say whatever. Again, you were the worst person in the world, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, if you wanted to go out and protest, even if you wanted to have like 50 people and you were going to social distance, you were the worst person in the world. But now, Tam is completely fine with thousands of people gathering, like completely fine, no questions asked. So again, these people have no credibility, like none whatsoever. I mean, we already knew that before, but this is just the icing on the cake, the cherry on top that just proves that they don't have any credibility. Because if they did, they would be against the protest, or at the very least, they would be like, hey, we need social distancing, we need mask. Again, I don't believe in masks, but they seem to think that masks are the God, gonna save us all. So that's kind of the problem when it comes to that stuff. So, um, getting back to the main point here too is that we live in a society where experts' opinions, they don't mean as much as what one would think. They're largely just there as a form of authority that you don't really. And the other thing too is that you don't necessarily need to be an expert in a lot of these fields to understand the truth, to get to the truth. Like you don't need to be a climate scientist. Um, you don't need to be a climate scientist to understand the basic science behind climate change being BS, or even understand why they believe that it's such an issue. Like, you really don't. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be an MD or an epidemiologist to realize that the whole lockdown was a complete and utter fraud. A complete and utter fraud. A total scam. We never even should have did it in the first place. And at the very least, we should have probably opened up in late April, early May. Like I was saying, I started saying mid-April, early to mid-April. Yeah, we should stock up on PPE. Let's come up with a good plan. Let's open first week of May. It would have been perfect. We would have had no issues because we know there's several states, there's several countries that have reopened. They've been open for weeks, some of them even over a month. I mean, a lot of them over a month now, and they've had no issues whatsoever. And here we are, still, kicking boots, pounding sand, saying, "Oh, should we reopen or should we not reopen?" Even though we have an incredibly small amount of cases, and we know that it doesn't spread nearly as much. I mean, when this whole thing first came out, people were, "Oh, like, you got to wash everything every day. Like it sits on surfaces for weeks," and now we know that the amount of time that it sits on surfaces is actually much shorter than they originally said. It's actually less likely than they originally said to sit on surfaces. So, again, it is all a fraud, and I hate to put it that way, but I would be perfectly fine with the government. The government, if they flat out came out and came clean, saying like, "Yeah, we completely messed up." Okay, like, but the problem is that they refuse to do that. I mean, the governments are the problem is that it's really hurting the right wing governments more, especially in Canada, because in the States, most of them have reopened. But in Canada, you have Kenny and you have Ford who's buying into the paranoia that if you reopen, we're all going to die and all this crap. And like, I just don't get it. Like, Kenny continuously hints around, oh, the death rate's much lower. It's not nearly as deadly as we thought. And reopening won't be an issue. But yet they refuse to reopen. Like, just do it. And the other big problem, too, that I've pointed out in past videos, but um, we are not going to, when we do reopen, it's going to be a vastly different world than it was before. And people are still, me probably included, are still going to complain and point that out. And you'll have people pointing, oh, we're reopened. Why are you complaining? Stop complaining. Well, yeah, we're reopened, but there's so many restrictions and regulations that it's almost pointless to go out in public because you got to wash your hands a million times. You got to social distance. I mean, some places might force you to wear a mask, like all this garbage that is largely completely unneeded. So, anyway, I just wanted to make a video because as a society, we have to stop valuing. I mean, you don't stop valuing, but we have to be a lot more questioning and skeptical of quote unquote experts' opinion because the problem is that experts have been wrong about so many things, and not only just wrong, so wrong that they clearly were corrupted and clearly were lying to us. So, anyway, if you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple of things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute if you haven't already. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.